Buongiorno a tutti, vi ringrazio per essere qui
Good morning,
presenti e
everybody.
ringrazio anche gli
I
organizzatori per
thank you
avermi
for
invitato a
your presence, and
partecipare
I
a
would like to
questo
thank the
straordinario.
organizers for inviting me to participate in this extraordinary event. My speech deals with the Longobard warriors in the Judicaria of the Seprio. First of all, let's see what Seprio is. This is a territory of ancient origins with a history of thousands of years, extending between today's provinces of Varese, Northern Milan, Como, and the Swiss canton Ticino. In Seprio, we find 5 important Longobard centers: Seprio, which is today's Castel Seprio; Pagus Artiaco, today's Arsago Seprio; Castro Novate, which is today's Castel Novate; and further north, Stabulum, which is today's Stabia, today's Swiss canton Ticino, and Campiliorum, today Campione d'Italia, today an Italian exclave in Swiss territory. In the territory of today's province of Varese, the Longobards occupied the imposing late Roman military fortification of Castel Seprio. This became the capital of the Judicaria, which is a smaller territorial district than the duchy, administered by a magistrate known as Scudalascio or Judex. The castrum had great importance also thanks to its strategic position along the main communication routes. Also, the small village of Castelnovate and that of Arsago became particularly important. The first, on the eastern bank of the Ticino River, controlled the river route. The second, located in the center between Castel Seprio and Castelnovate at the crossroads of 2 important communication routes, was probably chosen as a residential center by the Arimannia, that is, the nobles who governed and administered the district. This is proven by the presence of the rich Longobard necropolis in Arsago, which is absent in both Castel Seprio and Castelnovate. Stabia and Campione d'Italia were also located in 2 strategic points along communication routes, and here too we have noble settlements, Arimannic settlements. The elements we find in the great goods, not only of Arsago, but of all Italian necropolises, have allowed us to understand that the Longobard warriors held a shield, had a sword called spatha. They also carried a seax, a short single-edged weapon, a spear, and in some cases also a hatchet or a bow and arrows. So the most important warriors were also equipped with chainmail or lamellar armor and helmet. From the type of remains of the clothing and equipment, we can identify the degree of nobility of the owner, and the finishing of the weapons or the shield also gave us an indication of the social position of the warrior. The spatha and the seax were almost a status symbol of the Longobard warrior that highlighted their status as a nobleman and a freeman. The spatulas appear in warriors' burials. The swords, the spatha, appeared in warriors' burials since the beginning of the 6th century. They are long weapons, able to cut from both sides, and it is assumed that they were mainly used when riding horseback to hit the enemy with the cut and not with the point. The sword blade was forged according to a German technique. It consists of 3 parts: the 2 lateral edges and the central core. The central part was damascened. This is a special processing of the blades, which gives them greater elasticity and strength, and also involves a decorative motif, which is placed in the fuller part of the blade, the central groove. The ornamental motifs created by damascening involved knots or herringbone, as we see here. In most cases, We do not have the hilt of this spatula, so the grip, which is in perishable organic materials such as wood or horn. Only the most valuable swords had handles covered with decorated metal foils, as in this case, which were found at Nocera Umbra and Trezzo Sulada. All swords had an average length of 85 to 95 centimeters, blade width between 5 and 6 centimeters, and weight between 1,000 and 1,200 grams. All these swords had a very pronounced balancing towards the tip of the blade, on average 20-30 centimeters from the guard, which made them poorly maneuverable in hand-to-hand combat. As to the scabbards, we have many preserved. They were made of wood with a fur lining and covered in leather on the outside, and attached to a weapon belt with a suspension system. In the warrior equipment and the grave goods, we also have the belts. Belts were a typical and widespread element of both armament and clothing, both for men and women. They generally consisted of a leather belt with iron or metal elements. And several types of belt are documented, which could also be worn at the same time. One to fix the tunic and hang the a leather bag, and another military, more elaborate, to hold the sword and the sax. So here in the picture you can see a belt to carry the sword, and two different models of belts to carry the sax. The Longobards reached a high level of metal working. We have frequent silver, bronze, and iron objects, the latter often embellished with decoration in silver, brass, or gold, obtained through a gemina, damaskining, and plating techniques. In Arzago, we have a large number of iron belt harnesses embellished with a gemina. This was a technique consisting in decorating by beating a very thin silver, brass, or gold wire inside a groove, which was engraved with burin and chisel. The most common ornamental motifs were geometric and zoomorphic. Let's now look at the warriors of Arzago Seprio. In 1972, the town school building had to be enlarged. During the excavation, by chance, 6 Longobard burials were brought to light. In 1983, a further excavation campaign in the same area unearthed a further 9 graves. Of the 15 burials found between 1972 and 1983, only 1 was intact. All the others had already been tampered with and plundered in ancient times. The excavation campaigns have not yet defined the complete size of this necropolis, which is still largely unexplored. However, the GeoRadar investigation in 1994 revealed the presence of many graves over a vast surrounding area. And again in 1994, on the basis of GeoRadar data, a further excavation campaign was carried out, which located precisely and brought to light another 10 graves. The entire necropolis can be dated between the end of the 6th and the second half of the 7th century. Currently, the excavation campaigns of 1972, 83, and 94 have brought to light 26 graves in all, many of which are burials of Longobard aristocrats. As said, all the burials had already been tampered with, but they still conserve the significant elements such as swords, axes, spears, and shields. The necropolis of Arsago Seprio today is the largest Longobard burial area and is the only one in Italy preserved in situ and visible to the public. In the burials so far excavated at Arsago Seprio, the following have been found: two swords with a simple handle of organic material, which has not been preserved, the remain of a shield, 4 bronze studs, a laurel leaf, a spear tip, 3 axes, a spearhead, 2 arrowheads of different types, one bearded and the other with a wide slit in the center, and bandolier belts and the weapon belts associated with the seax and the swords. With regard to the olive leaf-shaped arrowhead in tomb 5, which you can see here in the image, the massive structure of the blade and the central groove uncut can suggest 2 possible uses that go beyond the fight. The first is that it could be part of a sign holder, and the second that it was used as an incendiary arrow by placing in the hole a piece of fabric soaked in pitch that was set on fire. There's a third hypothesis that came out from a discussion between myself and Jonathan Brovelli, a scholar of historical archery, with whom I had extensive discussions on this arrowhead. The bow used by Longobards in Pannonia was Asian origin, so it was a composite bow with curved sides, which could be used also from horseback, and the speed of the arrow and the space covered by the arrow was much greater than the monolithic single-piece wooden bows. It also required the use of heavy arrows. So Arsago's arrow might have been a training arrow for long parabolic shots. These heavy tips, arrow blades, when they fall on the ground, they penetrate deeply, and it can be difficult to extract them, to recover them. So there is a risk that the tip will detach from the rod and remain stuck in the ground. So the slot could have had a very precise function, which is to fix into the blade a thin strip of leather that could help to extract the arrow if it got stuck into the ground. Of the 2 swords found in Arsago, the one in tomb 19 was on the left side of the deceased and wrapped in his belts, together with a seax and a small knife. The blade of this sword is damascened, as was often the case. Unfortunately, the damascening of these swords in tombs 19 and 26 are deteriorated, partly because the wooden remains of the wood and leather of the scabbards have mineralized and have almost completely covered the blades. In tomb 26, there's a shield of which we still have the central part and the elements of the iron arm hold. And we also have a sword and a knight's spur in geminated iron and some elements of iron and bronze belts. With regard to weapon belts, we have two types. We have a multiple belt in a geminated iron in tombs 5 and 13. And in tomb 15, we have one in simple iron. The belt with the suspension system for the sword is present in tomb 19. Multiple belts with bronze elements of the wolf head type are found in tombs 7, 17, and 20. The belt in tomb 20 is associated with a seax and a small knife. Here you can see the multi-purpose belt in a geminated iron, the wolf's head type in bronze, and the bandolier type in iron for carrying the sword. Here you can see two reconstructive drawings of the Longobard warriors of Arsago. Of particular interest, you can see how the belts and the weapons attached to them were worn. The warrior of Castel Seprio. To date, at Castel Seprio, only one burial has been found within the castrum area. This tomb was discovered casually in 1966 during restoration on the facade of the Basilica of San Giovanni. The burial was inside the thickness of the curtain wall. The deceased had been buried with a sword between the chest and the right side, a spear between the chest and the left shoulder, a spur in a geminated iron between the femurs, and at the sides, a belt with elements in geminated iron. There was no trace of the shield and the seax. Of the sword, only the central part of the blade is preserved, where we can see the central damascening with the herringbone motif. The spearhead is a willow leaf shape, a very common type in northern Italy, with similarities to Germanic and Bavarian examples. Let's look at now the warriors of Stabia. The first burial of a warrior in Stabia was unearthed between 1833 and 1838. It contained the remains of a parade shield and golden cross. We have no evidence of the presence of weapons or other elements. The shield is decorated with gilded bronze plates, which are decorated with plant elements, the tree of life, a cantharos, and animal and human figures, a knight, and a rampant lion or dog looking backwards. This shield is dated to the second 30 years of the 7th century AD. In 1973, two more Longobard burials were found. The grave goods of the first tomb are military equipment with a seax, the remains of a scabbard, a small knife, and a weapon belt with iron decorations. Here too, we have not found the sword, the spear, and shield, perhaps plundered in ancient times. The second burial the second burial had no weapons, no elements, no objects were found. The last burial of a warrior in Stabia was found during an archaeological investigation in 1999, which unearthed a Longobard necropolis with 6 tombs, in particular tomb 3 of the first half of the 7th century, had the remains of a high-rank man with rich grave goods, including an geminated belt and weapons. Specifically, the grave goods consisted of a spear, a sword, a axe, a knife, a small knife, a shield, the sword belt, a multiple belt, and a knight's spur. You can see some of these elements here. Here you can see a drawing that reconstructs the outfit of the Longobard warriors of Stabia. You can see how the belts and weapons were worn. The Seprio area has always played an important role in the geopolitical events of ancient Insubria throughout its history, from the Upper Paleolithic to the Duchy of Milan under the Visconti and Sforza families, crossed by important rivers such as Ticino, and land communication routes such as Mediolanum Verbanus. This territory has witnessed the development of cultures such as Lagozza in the Neolithic and Gola Secchiana in the protohistoric period, and it became an important center of power in the Longobard and later periods. In the last 50 years, we have found many remains of the Arimannia of the Seprio, but there is still much to be discovered. Now that the ancient custom of Castel Seprio and the monastery of Torba have been included in the UNESCO World Heritage List since 2011, scientific research has resumed a few years ago with archaeological surveys and studies by the State University and Catholic University in Milan. Archaeological research remains a very important activity to continue to highlight the importance of a territory that has strongly marked the history of Lombardy and beyond. We hope that archaeological research will soon resume, also at the necropolis of Ansago Seprio, and last but not least, at the site of Castelnovate. This would enable us to add many of the still missing pieces of the history of this territory, together with the findings in other areas of Lombardy and the rest of Italy, will help to discover more about the identities of the many identities that are part of our roots. I have finished. I thank you for your attention. Thank you so much.